Imagine Mr. Beast in ancient Babylon. I gave away 10 wives, but if they cheat, they're getting drowned. That sounds like clickbait, but back then, it was real life.
Welcome to the medieval era, where people didn't just fight wars with swords, they also invented some of the most twisted, jaw-dropping, nightmare-fueled sexual customs you've probably never heard of. And trust me, after this, you'll never look at your history teacher the same way again. You think Tinder dates are awkward? Back then, your first night could literally belong to your landlord. One of the most disturbing medieval traditions was droit du seigneur, the so-called right of the Lord. Imagine you finally get married, your wife is waiting in the bridal chamber, and suddenly your landlord bursts in like, "Yo, it's my turn first." That's right. Feudal lords claimed they had the right to sleep with brides on their wedding night before the husband ever touched her. Now, whether this was law everywhere or just urban legend, the fear was real enough that peasants actually tried to bribe their way out of it. Basically, the medieval version of buying a VIP subscription to skip ads, except the ads were your wife being defiled. But hey, it gets worse. Some medieval people believed that sex with corpses could cure diseases. Yeah, necrophilia wasn't just whispered about in creepy graveyards. In some cases, it was openly practiced by executioners. After hanging or beheading criminals, certain men would assault the bodies before burial because they believed it would transfer strength or purge evil. Imagine being so sick that instead of calling a doctor, you called Jeff the hangman like, "Bro, I need you to hook me up with a corpse real quick." This wasn't medicine, this was medieval DLC for hell.
Speaking of hell, the church had its own horrors. Priests weren't always the pious, saintly figures you imagine. Some were notorious for running secret brothels called stews. Picture it. You walk into a confessional, ready to repent, and Father Gregory is like, "Yes, my son, but first, let's talk about our special 2-for-1 sins package in the back room." These places weren't hidden underground dens. Sometimes they were so public that kings and bishops had to pass laws against priests pimping out nuns. That's right. The very people meant to save your soul were also renting out women like medieval Uber drivers. Now let's talk torture, because apparently sex and torture were the medieval peanut butter and jelly. One infamous device was the chastity belt. Sounds romantic, right? Wrong. These iron contraptions were strapped onto women, locked tight with keys only husbands could keep to make sure wives stayed pure. Except here's the kicker. They weren't hygienic, they caused infections, and sometimes the keys got lost. So yeah, imagine being locked in a rusty underwear padlock, praying your husband doesn't misplace the key after a pub crawl. Some women even died from infections caused by these belts. The medieval version of Find My iPhone would have saved lives. And just when you think you've heard it all, there were public spectacles of humiliation called skimmington rides. If a man was suspected of being sexually submissive to his wife, the town would force him to ride backwards on a donkey while the crowd banged pots and pans, mocking him as less of a man. Now imagine your toxic ex making memes about you, except it's the entire village, live, no Wi-Fi needed. Sexual humiliation was entertainment, and the audience was everyone from kids to the town drunk. So yeah, you might think modern life is stressful, taxes, bad Wi-Fi, Spotify ads, but at least you don't have to worry about your landlord demanding access to your wedding night or catching a plague from your chastity belt. And that's just scratching the surface. In the next section, we're diving even deeper into the rabbit hole of medieval sexual nightmares, from animal roleplay that was anything but cute to medical cures that would make you scream. Stay with me, because it's about to get even darker.
You ever complain about awkward doctor visits? Imagine medieval medicine, where sexual healing meant something far more horrifying than Marvin Gaye ever intended. Let's start with the so-called cure for impotence. Physicians in the Middle Ages sometimes recommended men rub ground-up animal testicles on themselves, or worse, eat them raw. That's right, if you couldn't perform, the solution was basically a medieval smoothie made of goat balls. And if that didn't work, they'd prescribe bloodletting from the penis. Yes, literally slicing it open to release bad humors. No wonder half these dudes died younger than TikTok influencers' careers. But women didn't get off any easier. Some cures for female infertility involved having women sit on steaming piles of animal dung because the vapors were believed to open the womb. Imagine your doctor handing you a prescription that just says, "Go sit on poop." That was gynecology back then. And if that failed, they sometimes recommended women swallow ground-up beetles or drink potions mixed with menstrual blood. WebMD Medieval Edition would have been flagged as a crime scene. Now here's something straight out of a nightmare: bestiality trials. People caught in sexual acts with animals weren't just executed, the animals were too. Entire villages gathered to watch pigs, goats, or donkeys put on trial, sentenced to death, and sometimes burned alive alongside their human partner. It was part punishment, part entertainment. Like the worst Netflix show you never asked for. And guess what? People actually showed up in droves, cheering like it was Game of Thrones. Imagine watching your neighbor Steve get executed next to his goat while your kids eat roasted chestnuts like it's a family picnic. That was medieval Saturday night.
And speaking of executions, nothing screams sexual nightmare like the pear of anguish. This torture device looked like a metal fruit inserted into either the mouth, anus, or vagina, then cranked open until it tore flesh apart. Authorities claimed it was used on adulterers, prostitutes, or homosexuals. In reality, it was a sadist's wet dream disguised as justice. Imagine your worst dentist visit ever, then multiply it by 10, add medieval rust, and sprinkle in an entire village watching. That's the pear. Let's pivot to something weirdly public: bridal bed inspections. In some regions, after a wedding night, the entire community expected proof that the marriage had been consummated. Families literally paraded blood-stained sheets through the streets as evidence of virginity. If there was no blood, accusations of fraud flew, marriages were annulled, or worse, women were accused of witchcraft. So yeah, if you thought your wedding was stressful, try having your in-laws waiting outside with popcorn, demanding you prove you did the deed successfully. And then there's trial by touch. Certain courts believed a woman accused of adultery could be judged by whether she blushed when another man touched her hand in public. If her cheeks turned red, she was guilty. That's it. No lawyers, no jury, just some creepy dude caressing your palm while the village stares at your face. Imagine losing your freedom because you're naturally shy. Medieval justice was basically Tinder with the death penalty. Finally, let's talk about monks and relics. Some monasteries collected so-called holy objects that were basically phallic symbols. Pilgrims paid to touch them, believing it boosted fertility. So picture this: you're a desperate couple traveling for days just to pay money to rub your hands on a wooden penis carved by Brother Thomas in the year 1200. That's not religion, that's the world's most cursed amusement park ride. So far, we've had corpse medicine, donkey trials, poop therapy, and community sex inspections, and we're only warming up. In the next section, we'll go even farther into the forbidden: cults, punishments that sound like Saw movies, and rituals that'll make you wonder how humanity survived long enough to invent TikTok dances.
Okay, by now you're probably thinking, there's no way it gets worse than donkey trials and poop therapy. Oh my sweet summer child, welcome to the medieval rabbit hole, where things just keep spiraling into WTF territory. Let's start with something that sounds harmless until it isn't: courtly love rituals. Imagine simping so hard that you literally drink your crush's bathwater. Yep, knights and nobles sometimes collected the dirty water women bathed in, or even their nail clippings, and kept them in lockets as tokens of love. Sounds romantic until you realize medieval hygiene was basically non-existent. Bathwater then was less spa day and more soup of filth. Congrats, you just swallowed 12 different diseases in the name of chivalry. But hey, at least that didn't involve fire. Some customs did. Take trial by hot iron. If a woman was accused of cheating, she might be forced to carry a red-hot bar of iron across a set distance. If her wounds healed quickly, she was declared innocent. If they festered, she was guilty. So essentially, God was supposed to play medieval ER doctor while the village watched. Imagine losing your marriage because your immune system lagged. That's like being canceled today because your Wi-Fi cut out during a live stream.
Speaking of fire, there were bonfire fertility rites where couples were ordered to publicly have sex in fields, barns, or even on top of haystacks, all to bless the crops. Imagine being told by your local priest, "Okay guys, time to strip. The wheat won't grow unless we watch you smash." This wasn't some fringe practice either. In some regions, entire villages gathered to encourage fertility. Basically medieval porn, but without OnlyFans paywalls. And then there's the darker side of witch hunts. Some inquisitors claimed witches flew to sabbats where they rubbed flying ointment on their bodies. But here's the catch. That ointment often contained hallucinogenic plants, applied directly to the genitals with a broomstick. Yes, that's where the image of witches riding broomsticks comes from. They weren't sweeping floors, they were tripping balls. Imagine medieval Karen catching her neighbor high and naked in a barn and shouting, "She's a witch!" Next thing you know, you're on trial for doing the medieval equivalent of vaping shrooms. But the church didn't just persecute witches. They also weaponized shame. One device, called the shrewsfiddle, locked a woman's neck and hands into a wooden frame, often with a metal dildo attached to the front. The accused was then paraded around town as punishment for supposed sexual misconduct. Think of it as medieval cancel culture, except you couldn't delete your account. You had to walk around like a humiliating action figure until the crowd got bored. Now, let's get even more grotesque. Public rapes as punishment. In some wars, victorious armies considered it their right to assault women of the defeated side. But in certain regions, authorities legalized this by organizing it as part of judicial punishment. A woman accused of adultery could be handed over to soldiers as justice. Imagine going to court expecting a trial, only to be told your sentence is being used as free entertainment for a battalion. That's not law, that's pure barbarism with a crown on top. And if that wasn't humiliating enough, some men were sentenced to forced cross-dressing. A cheating husband might be paraded through town in his wife's clothes, mocked by the entire village. Think of it like medieval TikTok roasting, except you couldn't log off. And honestly, if you're a dude walking around in your wife's underwear while peasants pelt you with rotten cabbage, you probably regret every life choice. So far, we've covered peasants, priests, and punishments. But you're probably wondering, what about kings and queens? Surely the nobility were more refined, right? Oh no. If anything, the rich and powerful were running the most deranged medieval after-parties you can imagine. Let's start with the royal love potions. Court alchemists created tonics for kings who wanted to boost their sex lives. The recipes? Ground up gemstones, mercury, crushed insects, and sometimes human blood. Imagine your doctor saying, "Here, drink this ruby dust smoothie with a splash of lead. You'll feel viral in no time." Spoiler, it usually killed them faster than it turned them into Casanova. Honestly, Viagra ads would have had a field day in the 1300s. But queens had their own twisted realities. In some courts, young noblewomen were examined by midwives before marriage to guarantee their virginity. And if they failed the inspection, families sometimes staged bloody scenes on wedding night sheets using animal blood just to fake proof. Picture a royal servant sprinting into the kitchen like, "Quick, slaughter a chicken, the princess needs her marriage to look legit." Nothing screams romance like poultry murder on your honeymoon. Speaking of marriages, some royal couples weren't even allowed privacy. In certain traditions, nobles consummated their unions with attendants literally watching from the corner to witness the act. Imagine trying to have your first intimate moment while 6 old dudes with scrolls are taking notes like judges on medieval sex idol. That wasn't intimacy, that was state business. And when it came to punishment, royalty made sure theirs was theatrical. Take castration as political revenge. Rival nobles or rebellious priests were sometimes publicly mutilated so they could never produce heirs. Entire crowds gathered to watch enemies literally lose their future bloodlines in the most painful way imaginable. If you thought unfollowing someone on Instagram was brutal, imagine canceling their entire family tree in one swing.
Medicine, of course, didn't make things better. Ever heard of stone cutting for impotence? Surgeons believed carving into the perineum, Yes, that tender spot between your bits could release stones, blocking male performance. Spoiler, there were no stones, just a lot of screaming and infections. Picture a drunk barber surgeon with a rusty knife digging around while telling you to bite a stick. No anesthesia, no antibiotics, just vibes. But here's one of the nastiest twists. Medieval fertility rituals involving drinking human semen or menstrual blood as medicine. Physicians claimed it could restore balance to the body's humors. Imagine walking into a clinic and instead of antibiotics, your prescription is, yeah, just chug this bodily fluid twice a day with meals. This wasn't science. It was Saw movie fan fiction with extra plague germs. And don't think the rich were spared humiliation. At certain courts, kings punished women accused of sexual scandal by forcing them to march naked through public squares while crowds jeered and threw food. One queen was even accused of bedding her stepson, and though historians debate the truth, the punishment was written down in lurid detail, stripped, shaved, and paraded like livestock. If Twitter cancel culture existed back then, it would have just been peasants with cabbages.
Finally, let's not forget the royal orgies. Some monarchs threw masquerade balls where masks weren't just decorative. They covered up scandalous encounters happening in candlelit corners. Rumors spread of nobles swapping partners, dressing as animals, or engaging in bizarre fetish play while servants were forced to watch. Basically, eyes wide shut, but with fewer silk sheets and way more plague fleas. So yeah, next time you hear someone glorify the noble, elegant Middle Ages, remember, behind the castles and crowns were gemstone aphrodisiacs, chicken blood wedding hacks, and kings who thought sex was a spectator sport. And we're not done. In next section, we'll explore even darker corners. Executions turned into sexual theater, cannibalistic rumors from famine-stricken towns, and punishment devices that would make even horror movie directors say, okay, that's too much.
Let's start with executions turned into erotic theater. In some regions, women convicted of adultery or prostitution weren't just killed, they were stripped naked, bound, and displayed in front of jeering crowds before their execution. Authorities claimed this was, quote, moral warning, but in reality, it turned into a grotesque spectacle where entire villages gathered like it was a football match. Imagine your death sentence being live-streamed to the whole neighborhood, except instead of Twitch chat, it's angry peasants throwing rotten turnips at you. And then there were famine years, when rumors spread of people resorting to sexual cannibalism. Chroniclers whispered about starving towns where corpses weren't just eaten for survival, but desecrated in grotesque ways, mixing hunger with twisted desire. Were these exaggerated horror stories? Probably, but the fact that multiple sources accused entire villages of it tells you just how messed up desperation could get. The medieval vibe was basically plague outside, cannibal orgies inside. Humanity at its finest. Speaking of horror, let's talk about the Spanish donkey torture. Men accused of sexual crimes were stripped, forced to straddle a sharp wooden plank shaped like a donkey's back, and paraded through town. The weight of their bodies tore them apart in ways I won't describe too vividly, but let's just say jeans would never fit again. It was punishment disguised as carnival entertainment, complete with cheering crowds and drum beats. Imagine Disneyland's It's a Small World ride, except it's your genitals being split in half.
Another device straight out of hell was the Judas chair. Victims, often accused sodomites, were lowered naked onto a pyramid-shaped spike, the tip entering slowly into the anus or vagina. The longer you sat, the deeper it went. Guards sometimes added weights to speed things up. This wasn't execution alone, it was prolonged, humiliating torture meant to blend pain with sexualized cruelty. Think medieval BDSM, except no safe words, no consent, and the safe word was basically death. And if you think that's too much, brace yourself for the cucking stool.
In many towns, women accused of being scolds or sexually unruly were strapped into chairs and dunked repeatedly into rivers or cesspools. Crowds gathered to laugh as they choked, froze, and sometimes drowned. Some versions even strapped men in when accused of impotence or infidelity, basically public waterboarding as family entertainment. Today we have water parks, they had humiliation rides. But nothing compares to the wheel punishments. Criminals tied to a wagon wheel weren't just broken limb by limb, sometimes they were displayed naked for days while passersby mocked, groped, or mutilated them. Sexual violence wasn't incidental, it was baked into the punishment. Imagine dying slowly in broad daylight while people treated your body like a public punching bag.
And then there were mock weddings for criminals. Picture this. A man caught in bestiality might be married to the animal he was accused of violating, dressed in wedding clothes, paraded through town, mocked, and finally executed alongside the animal. Entire communities turned sexual humiliation into a carnival. Netflix could never produce something this grotesque, not even their worst true crime series. Oh, and here's one more medieval horror. The Scold's Bridle. A metal cage clamped onto a woman's head with an iron bit shoved into her mouth, often spiked to tear her tongue if she spoke. Many were engraved with phallic decorations just to humiliate women accused of gossip or lustfulness. Imagine your punishment being both mutilation and forced cosplay as a sex toy. That's not justice, that's nightmare architecture with brass hinges. So executions weren't just about death. They were theater, sexualized, humiliating, and grotesque. Public shame was entertainment, and your suffering was the medieval equivalent of going viral.
If you've stuck with me this far, first of all, respect. By now, you've seen lords stealing brides, peasants eating bugs for fertility, kings drinking gemstone smoothies, and criminals riding donkey torture rides. Please subscribe to our channel, because obviously your school never taught you the history in this way. Make sure you have liked the video, and please comment below where you're listening from. I am so eager to know that. Okay, now you're probably asking, how could medieval society get any darker than this? Oh, my friend, welcome to the grand finale. Let's start with the plague orgies. When the Black Death swept across Europe, people panicked in two directions. Some whipped themselves bloody in the streets, while others decided, screw it, we're all dying anyway. Entire towns dissolved into underground sex parties where villagers, nobles, and even priests joined in. No rules, no protection, just disease swapping faster than your Wi-Fi when everyone's on Netflix. Imagine a doomsday rave, but instead of glow sticks, it's buboes and corpses outside the door. Now, speaking of priests, some secret heretical cults performed rituals that blended worship with explicit acts. The Adamites, for example, believed in returning to pure innocence, which translated into running around naked during religious ceremonies, often escalating into mass orgies. Picture a medieval Sunday service where the congregation strips mid-sermon and starts doing things that definitely aren't in the Bible. You thought your church youth group was weird? These guys were redefining the meaning of Holy Communion. But not all cults were that playful. Some were terrifying. In famine-stricken regions, chroniclers wrote of secret groups that performed ritual sex with corpses or drank human fluids as part of black masses. Were all these reports true? Hard to say, but the fact that multiple inquisitors accused entire villages shows how far hysteria went. Even the rumors alone tell you how obsessed medieval society was with mixing sex, death, and punishment in the most grotesque ways possible.
And if that wasn't enough, let's talk about the dance of shame. Certain communities forced adulterers to perform humiliating dances in public squares, completely naked. Men wore antlers, women were chained, and the crowd clapped along to drums. It wasn't just punishment, it was sexualized comedy. Imagine TikTok challenges, but instead of renegade, it's do the humiliation dance or die. The last stop on our hell tour? Mock resurrection rituals. In certain fertility cults, couples reenacted death and rebirth myths by burying themselves half-naked in shallow graves, then being resurrected through sexual acts. Picture a crowd watching you crawl out of dirt mid-coitus, chanting about rebirth. Honestly, even horror directors today would look at that and say, yeah, too weird for cinema. So there you have it. From corpse medicine to donkey torture, from plague sex raves to pigeon gynecology, the medieval era wasn't just brutal in war, it was disturbingly creative in the bedroom, the courtroom, and the execution yard. You survived this journey, but you'll probably never look at castles, monks, or even pigeons the same way again. And if history teaches us anything, it's this. Humanity has always been a mess. The difference is, in the Middle Ages, the mess was public, bloody, and usually involved a crowd of peasants cheering you on. So next time you curse about slow Wi-Fi or awkward first dates, just remember, at least your landlord isn't demanding first night rights, your doctor isn't handing you goat testicles for medicine, and nobody's forcing you to straddle a wooden donkey in the town square. Congratulations, you've officially survived the most disturbing sexual practices of the medieval era.